easier name to remember. So let's call it my app. Right, and let's just for housekeeping, remove that vanilla.js zip file. Cool. So now we've got the downloaded app. Let's actually talk through, what this app does. So I'm going to open this inside my IDE. So let me actually open it up. All right, let me find it. There we go. Right, so let's take a look at this sample application that we downloaded. Right, essentially, we're really interested in only 3 files. Right, the first is the index.html, which is basically our single-page application expressed in HTML. Right, and what I'm really interested in is actually at the bottom of this file here. Right, you can see that we're pulling in a couple of files. The first one is the Auth0 SPA SDK, right? And the version that it is here showing here is 1.2, but the latest is 1.9. So let me actually update that. So by updating this to 1.9, we gain the ability to use the latest features that the platform has to offer. So for example, refresh token rotation, right? And you can see that it's also pulling in 2 other files. One is called UI.js, right? And the other one app.js. Right, so let's take a look at UI.js. So this is UI.js, and it contains all the logic to refresh or your UI or draw your UI basically. And because we're using plain vanilla JavaScript, we're writing our own router here that simply looks at the path that you're on and triggers certain action. And if we pop over to app.js, right, that's where it contains all kind of the core logic of the platform and does things like login, right, log out here. And what we're interested in as well, right, is in this function called configure client, right, which we will be kind of updating it in a little bit. Right, so let me just look at my notes kind of where we are. Right. That's awesome. All right. Okay, so we've got all this set up, downloaded the code. Let's actually head back to the dashboard, right? And look at the instructions that Auth0 provided for us here. So it says here because the downloaded app is configured to run on localhost port 3000, so Auth0 is telling us to go into the application settings and configure it for the allowed callback URLs, allowed web origins, and allowed logout URL to point to this domain. And then after that, run npm install and start. Right, so let's actually do that. So if we head into the application here, back to settings, okay, let's actually now, in the allowed callback URL, specify that URL. But just a note here, instead of localhost, what I'm going to do here is actually alias that localhost to point to, it's a localhost, but alias to my website. And the reason is because Auth0 treats localhost slightly differently. And in our demonstration, we're going to make requests for access tokens, right? And if we're on localhost, then we need to grant kind of consent to get that to grant those permissions, and we don't want that. And the reason why it's kind of different for localhost is just for security reasons, right? Like it could be cross-domain attacks. And because we're no longer using localhost, then we need to run this single-page app from a secure connection. I'm going to call that HTTPS there. Right, so let's copy that, put in logout URLs as well as web origins. Right, and I am also going to enable the rotating refresh token feature. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to just set the timeout there to really short-lived, right, for 10 seconds there, put a lifetime in 5 seconds, and I'm going to click save changes. Right, and let me just kind of quickly run through with you how I set up the alias as well as how we can run from a secure local environment. So if I actually pull out my etc host file, right, like I said, this is my local host pointing to this IP address, and I basically aliased my website to the same local host. So nothing really fancy there, right? But what we need to do now is actually to launch this application from a secure origin. And what I am going to do here first is actually just get at the sample code, just so that, you know, when I copy and paste some boilerplate stuff, you can see what the differences are. So I'm going to commit -m. So sample, let's say sample app. Okay, and that's it there. So let's actually head back over to the IDE here. And so to set it to run from a secure origin, what we need to do is actually just modify two files. The first is inside the bin www file. We're not going to need these following lines. And so what really the changes are is inside this server.js file. And what I'm going to do is copy and paste it here. And let me just kind of run through you what that difference is. So what we're really doing here is that it's required to run HTTPS, and then pulling in, reading some keys for my certificates, and then using those keys here to create a server. All right, so that's what I'm doing. And so my son actually ran into the room, but just adds to the fun of it, doesn't it? Right, so those are the changes. Let's actually then now run npm. Right, so go back into the app and actually, what was it? Yep, npm install. Right, and then we can run npm start, and you can see that now we're starting off from. All right, so so what I didn't do was obviously install those keys. So I actually need to use an application called mkcert here and create the keys. All right, so that's done. Let's do npm start once more. Right, and there it works. So now we can head over to this my website and take a look at the application that we've created. So there we go. You can see it's from secured origin here with that lock symbol there, and this is our application. Right, and what I'm going to do here, right, as you can see, is actually to log in. Right, and since it's the first time that, you know, a brand new tenant no users, I'm actually going to sign up for an account. Right, and gonna click. Right, so that is set up, and if we look into, I'm logged in. If you can head over to the profile, you can see, you know, the SDK or application returning our profile or my profile information. And it contains my name, email, and it shows here obviously that I haven't verified my email. Right, so just it. But, you know, behind the scenes, Auth0 actually returns a lot more information. So, you know, for debugging and for development purposes, let's actually, you know, take a closer look at what is actually, returned and captured by this Auth0 SPA SDK. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back into my editor here, and I'm going to open the app.js file, right? And actually, we're going to configure the client here, right? So this is the configuring the Auth0 client that's provided by the SDK. So I'm going to set the cache location here to use local storage. right? And because we are using the version 1.9, like I said, and we've enabled the feature on the platform, let's use refresh tokens. True. Awesome. Right. And then let's, with that saved, let's actually log out. And let's log in again. Is that right? Okay, that's right. Oh, awesome. Captured by my password manager. Right, so if we take a close look here, I'm logged in. What happens with setting that cache location to local storage? We gain the ability to actually, inspect all the information written by Auth0. And so you can see here, kind of enlarged this already, so I do hope that you can see everything here. Right, we get back an access token here, and it's got the client ID of the application, gets back an ID token, and it's just decoded in here. And you can see things like the claims that we get with that token. Right, you can see, like, for example, when it expires, etc., and the scopes that were requested. And just to round off that, on that topic, we can always pop over to, pop over to jwt.io and actually inspect the ID token there that was returned. Right? So you can see here, for example, in that ID token, it contains the following claims, right? My name, email, right? The expiry date, etc. All right, so that means with that done, right, we've configured the application actually to start using Auth0 for authentication. Right, so now, we have to configure an API within Auth0 for authorization. And, what helps would be kind of looking back at this diagram here. So, and just explain a little bit on API. So an API is an entity, right, that represents an external resource capable of accepting and responding to protected resource requests made by applications. So from an Auth0 spec, we're really calling it a resource server. So in our case, when our application wants to access an API, and this API, right, it must provide an access token, right? And this same access token can be used to access the API resources without having to authenticate again until it expires, right? And so this single page app is going to make a request for authorization request against the API that we create in Auth0, gets back the access token. We're going to use it and then call the API endpoint, right? So each API, right, let me come back, is actually defined by a set of defined permissions, and applications can always request a subset of these permissions and include them in an access token as part of the scope request parameter. So for our case, we are going to actually create an API. Right, and an API within Auth0 is really a representation of that resource server that we want to connect with. Right, so let's go ahead and create an API. And let me just move this Zoom window away again. Okay, so let's call this my secret API. And Auth0 is asking us here to provide a unique identifier, and it's recommending us to actually use a URL for that. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, and click create. Right, so like I said, an API is an entity, and that has a set of defined permissions, right? So if we hit back up in this, in settings of my API here in permissions, we can actually define, right, the permissions that this API has. So I'm going to click permissions. I'm going to add here read secret, right? And so the description really is just read secret, right? And I'm actually going to add it. So I've created the permissions, and applying permissions individually to users can be tedious and error prone, right? So let's actually head back over to settings here. let's go make it this a short-lived access token, right? Because I'm accessing some secret code there. And if we scroll down more, let me turn that far, yeah. Right, scroll down more, we come to where, RBAC settings here. So by actually flicking this switch here, enable RBAC, we have started enabling this API to apply RBAC policies. And I'm going to add permissions within the access token as well. So I'm going to enable that. And because we are using or have enabled refresh token rotation, so let's also enable this allow offline access. So we can start using refresh tokens to request for new access tokens. So let's click save. Right. And just to round that off, like I said, we've created the permissions, but applying them individually to users is going to be error-prone and tedious. So let's actually create a role, right, to group those permissions under a role. Right, so let's create a role, and let's call this secret agent. Right, secret agent. All right, and click create. Right, and for now, we're not going to assign the role to my user yet, just to see, kind of understand behind the scenes how we do authorization against an API. Right, so if I come back to my page here, I have configured an API in Auth0 for authorization. Right, and actually, we also enabled RBAC on it already. All right, so I'm going to do that. Right, so see in action. Well, we're just missing probably one step here. And so we've all set that all up on the Auth0 tenant. What is remaining here is popping back over to our IDE and actually making some code changes to it so that it actually calls the endpoint. Right. So let's open my the app.js. Yep, that's right. And let's actually just scroll down right to the bottom and add some code there. I'm just wondering, should I bring that up there? All right, so hopefully that's clearer. Maybe let me as well just increase the font size. So hopefully that helps. Right, so the first thing we need to do is, kind of create a function. Oops. Where am I here? Create a function called, let's call it get secret. Right, and it's going to be an asynchronous function because we're going to make some asynchronous calls and call this, right, set that up. All right, and we want to get request an access token from Auth0. So that's the first thing we need to do. So let's go ahead and create here an access token and use the Auth0 SDK here to actually get token silently, right? And we're going to pass in a few options here of parameters, right? The first is we need to specify which API we're authenticating against or trying to get an access token for. In this case, so we use the audience parameter here, just AUDIE, yep, that's correct, and specify HTTP PS, which is the identifier we created earlier, which is my secret service, not service, API, right? And then we're going to specify the scope that we need, which is, in this case, read secret. Right, so that will give, and obviously I forgot that we have to await for this. Right, so we've got that set up. Then once we get back the access token, we're going to use it to actually call our endpoint. So here we're going to create, make a call to the endpoint. So response fetch, right? And the URL, I'll input it a bit later. And what we need to do is specify a couple of the initialization options. So the first is method, and get here. And I'm going to specify the headers that we'll be sending along, right? And the first is we're going to specify content type. Right? as application JSON. And, the character encoding set is going to be UTF-8. Awesome. And we need to pass in the token into the authorization header. So the bearer token, authorization, there, and we're going to do that, bearer token. And pass in our access token in there. So, and then with that response, right, because it's application JSON, so let's actually, we need to, sorry, so let's go back here. I always forget to do this. Oh, wait, right, and we need to decode it, the JSON response. So response.json. Awesome. And just, for the debugging development, let's actually console log just to make sure that we actually got all that set up correctly. So response is secret. Oh, secret is secret. Okay, so we've got all that set up. So let me go back to the application. Right, and over here, also in my sample application, right, let's actually see what happens now. Oh, and I forgot one thing. So we've created the function, and now we need to obviously a way to call it. So that brings us back to index.html, where we have to create a button. So I'm going to do that right here. And actually copy one of the existing buttons so that we can just copy and paste. Right, so there we go. Don't need an ID. What is going to happen here is to call, with this click of a button, call my get secret code that I just, get secret function that we just written. I'm going to update the text for that. Secret code. And let's choose an appropriate font awesome icon, which in our case, user secret would work for us perfectly. All right, so let's go back to our application, actually refresh. Right, so you can see now I have a button here, secret code, right? Let's actually go ahead and click that. And that's not going to work here because what I did was I actually forgot to enter the endpoint URL that we're calling. So where is my fetch, right? So over there, so it's a pretty long function, and the reason is because it's actually a Lambda function, that's deployed onto AWS behind the API gateway. So I'm going to go do that here. Yeah. Right, and that's the endpoint that we are calling. So let's try that again. Refresh. Now let me just clear this console and actually click secret code in. Right, and as expected, right, we're getting a message unauthorized, right, because this user hasn't been granted any authorization access to that endpoint. Right, and just before we fix that, I'd just like to draw your attention back to the local storage, where we can actually take a look at the access token that was returned, all information. So you can see here that now instead of an opaque access token we're getting, right, we're getting an access token that's in the JWT format, right? And because we've enabled refresh token rotation, we're getting here a refresh token as well. So let's take a look at what this access token is actually returning. So if you copy that, we pop back over to jot.io, and paste it here, right? Just let me clear that syntax correctly. Right, you can see here that we've requested for the scope read access, right, the permission for it, but it's neither in the scope or nor in the permissions. So when I'm actually calling the endpoint, it is actually expecting those to grant access, but it's not present, and that's why we're getting an unauthorized response. So let's actually pop back over to the Auth0 management dashboard and fix that. So as before, we've created a role. Let's actually assign that role to the user, or me in this case. So this is me, and I am going to click here and assign role. Right, I'm going to select the role, the secret agent role we created, assign it, and there you go. And so now I have the role with the permission read secret that I can authorize, authenticate, and get the access token for. Right, so let's head back to the application now then, and let's actually, let me just bring this down, head back to console, let's clear that, and let's actually, again, trigger a call to my API endpoint. And that's probably, okay, let me actually log out first. Okay, and let me log in again. All right. Okay, and make a call again to secret code, and it's still unauthorized. And that is a, let's see what happened here. Did I? So it has a role. In fact, let's take a look at the access token that was returned and see if it actually contains the scopes. Right, so it's still returning not the permissions nor the scopes. So let's actually see what happened here. Right, so roles, it has the role assignment, secret agent, permissions. So sorry, so I created a role. I guess I didn't save when I was, okay, so let's do that again. Secret agent, view details, right, permissions, right, I didn't add the permissions to it as, right, let's do that. I can click read secret here, add permissions. Right, okay, it's there now. View, okay, let's actually just make another call to the endpoint. Right, and now it works because now the access token contains the appropriate permissions for me to access the endpoint. Right, and so if we pop back to local storage, and just take a look at that access token that was generated over here, right, you can see that right now we have the scope read secret and containing the claim permissions with read secret, and that is why now we can actually get back the secret code. Right, so since we've got a little bit of time, let me just quickly show you what was happening on the back end side of things. So let me pull in just this code here. Right, so back end, okay, let me switch screen here. Right, so the back end, the API endpoint that we were authenticating or requesting a resource against is actually, like I said, just a node function deployed onto AWS Lambda function. And it's in this index.js file. You can see that, let me make this actually clearer. And, right, okay, and let me just increase the font size again. Right, so what happens is when you make a GET request to this endpoint secret here, what happens is, it is going to return you a secret. But before it reaches this function, we have a custom authorizer function, it's called in Lambda, which basically, takes the authorization token here, right, decode it, and then gets the public key from Auth0, and then we call a function here, verify, right? Which passes in the access token, the public key that we have, and then it does a bunch of validation of that access token, like expiry, etc. And what we've customized it to do is to also check for the read secret permission, which we have over here, right? And also the check that it actually does have the read secret in the scope. And so that's why we're having those, and then it has been granted access to that resource, right? So if we come back over here, then that kind of, rounds up the tail end of this demonstration, which is pretty awesome because when I was kind of rehearsing this, I overshot the time allocated. So awesome. So with that done, let's talk a little bit about the coding challenge. So like I said, we basically solved the coding challenge, and the coding challenge for you guys, if you guys are interested in, is really just to sign up for an Auth0 tenant, create a web application that and it can be in any programming language of your choice, right? And it just implements the RBAC feature using Auth0. And you just got to make sure that you're calling the API with this endpoint here. If I click, this endpoint URL here, call against that endpoint and pass in a scope and permission with the read secret scope, right? And then just submit, the code to, just email me the secret code and the Auth0 tenant domain that you use for this challenge, right? And this tenant domain really is, if we go back into applications here, if I click my application, right, you'll see a field here called domain, and just, send me that domain. And, like I said, hopefully, you guys found this interesting, and we'll actually attempt the challenge. So with that said, happy, kind of to answer any questions you guys may have right now. And I guess I can actually see from here if there's any Q&A chat. Right, so I'm seeing a couple of questions here. Is there any, so for this is from Roy Listo. Is there any minimum requirements for JS framework? For example, can I use Auth0 for Angular 1.5? Right, so in situations like this, actually, Auth0's documentation is pretty awesome. So let's see actually if we can find that on Google. Auth0 Angular versions. I don't know, that's the say. Version 2 and above. So probably this I probably need to check. Probably it says here version 2 and above, so I'm not sure. Probably something that Roy, if you're happy, please drop me an email and I can, get back to you. So this is from Jitendra. I saw user can log in or register with Google Mail also. Is it possible? What all different platform can we use to log in? Right, so definitely, out of the box, when you create default, when you set up a tenant, Auth0, so let me talk a little bit about connections. So, Auth0 provides many different ways you can authenticate a user into an application, right? And we call them connections, right? And so we have, like we see here, database connections and social connection, right? And so we abstract the connections away from the applications so that you can mix and match kind of different forms of authentication into your application. So like what we've seen in this example, we have social and we have a database connection. So the question is, what are the platform or social connectors we have? So out of the box, we provide something like over 40 social providers that, let me close all the Zoom window first. Yep. Social connections, and let's create connection. So the UI kind of changed slightly. So here, over here, you can see all these social connections that we actually provide out of the box. But even if we don't supply one out of the box, we provide you with it's called step-by-step instructions on how you can actually configure your own social connection as long as they support Auth0. Right. So, okay, let's see what other questions we have. Right. Can we customize the login screen? So totally, right? And probably just kind of outside the scope of this discussion. But yes, you can totally configure the login experience. And it's really under universal login here. But, just again, like I said, time, 8 minutes. Okay, yeah, maybe. So what you can do here is actually in universal login, right? You can, like, for example, if you go into the login tab, right? And by simply flicking this customized login script here, right, we gain the ability to fully rip and replace the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So totally you can pull in all your own, you fully customize that login experience. Right, and last question, right? So this is from Chiyong. Auth0 supported almost all social login that you can think about. Oh, sorry. And so I guess thanks for that. I think it was answering the question from Rolisto. Awesome. And thanks, Jeff, for supplying the documentation, right, in the chat as well. All right. So with that, what I'm going to do is, really thank you guys for taking the time off today and joining the session. And again, if you have any questions, please feel to reach out to me, and my contact details are here. And, if you really want to join my growing number of followers on Twitter, right, you're more than welcome to do so. So the number down there stands only at 28. So actually, please do follow me on Twitter. Shameless plug there, right? So, well, again, thank you a lot for your time. Auth0's mission is to help innovators like yourselves innovate and not worry about identity. I hope somewhat in today's session we showed that. But again, please reach out and happy to do so. So I just looking here, I have maybe 3 more. Oh, all right, thanks. You're all very welcome. And so back to you, Liz.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody, for attending. What we'll be doing is sending out the information for the live coding challenge that John walked through via email now. You should receive an email from me. And I'll include John's contact details if you want to reach out to him directly. And then we should have a recording of today's session available within 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out to anyone in the Auth0 team. We'll be more than happy to help. Thank you, John.
Great, thanks, guys. Awesome.